Welcome, everybody. We really appreciate you joining us today. As Jen had mentioned, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening. We have a large turnout. We have folks joining us from all around the world. If we haven't met, my name is Joel Reed. I'm the Executive Director of the Pittsburgh Robotics Network. In Pittsburgh with Carnegie Mellon University, now over 90 direct robotics companies representing over 12 industry segments. We also have the center of the autonomous vehicle industry. Pittsburgh has been seen as becoming the robotics capital of the world. At the PRN, it's our mission to connect many of you in the audience today with this rapidly growing industry centered in Pittsburgh and beyond. And we want to work together with you to accelerate the overall adoption of autonomous systems. If you don't know us already, please engage with us. You can do that immediately on social or visiting us at our website. I would encourage you to go to LinkedIn. You can go ahead. We've put a QR code on the slide. Go ahead and capture that QR code right now. I'm actually watching our LinkedIn counter, so I would hope that you go and follow us. It's the best way to be in touch. Also, check us out on our ecosystem microsite as well, where we have a large number of our companies and the industries that they're working on listed there. There you'll see a breadth and depth of commercial development that's happening right here in Pittsburgh. For our event today, I'm really excited about this. We're going to talk about design. As a recent CEO of a robotics startup, this subject is near and dear to my heart. I believe aside from developing a sound business model built around a well-informed product strategy, I look at the design of our products, interfaces, and customer experiences to be a key contributor to a company's success. I'm very excited to hear from today's panel of experts. I put a great premium on this function, but it's one of the ones that I understand the less. So I'm looking forward to learning from our panelists. And this group that we've assembled today understands the importance of user design, and they've done this both on small and large scales. Joining us today is a world-class panel. It ranges from $1 billion business at Omnicell, which is an anchor company in the Pittsburgh community that grew from one of our earliest autonomous system startups, Automated Healthcare, almost 30 years ago, to Ready Robotics, which has raised over $40 million, working to build an operating system that we all need, and VistaPath, Biosystems, which uses machine augmentation to modernize pathology labs. Before we get started, I would like to recognize our leading sponsors. The organizations that you see listed here help define the Pittsburgh robotics community locally and extended internationally. These are the leaders in their respective industries, including research and education, such as Carnegie Mellon University and the University of Pittsburgh, business leaders such as JP Morgan, the Dentons Law Firm, Cowen, Cascadia Capital, and Harris Williams, and worldwide leaders in autonomous development, including Pittsburgh headquarter companies Argo AI and Aurora. We've included links in the chat. We encourage you to please check them out. So with that, I'd like to talk about our event today, which is presented by Bally Design, which is a leading product design firm and an important part of the Pittsburgh Robotics cluster. Our discussion today is going to be moderated by Julie Gulick, Bally's CEO. Before joining Bally, Julie was the program director at Philips HealthWorks, a healthcare startup incubator in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She also served in global product management roles at Philips, Respironics, Medrad, and McKesson. She's also a graduate of our esteemed local universities, Penn State University and the University of Pittsburgh's Katz School of Business. And in addition, having her lead this expert panel, Julie, I hope to hear a little bit about the Bally magic that I've heard you reference before. Before I hand this over to Julie, I would like to remind everybody we are going to have a 60-minute conversation. Then we have time allotted afterward to answer questions that you should submit to us. Please use the Q&A feature to submit their questions, not chat. We will look to field those at the end of the conversation. So with that, I will hand this over to Julie. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Joel. I'm so very excited to be here and to discuss design and human-computer interactions with the Pittsburgh Robotics Network. I'm also excited to introduce our panel to all of you. First up is Doug Descalzi, Vice President of Robotics and Automation at Omnicell. Doug has a long history of developing products in the medical device industry with leadership roles at Bayer Healthcare, formerly known as Medrad, where he served as the head of research and development for computed tomography, Medrad's largest business unit. He also was a co-founder of several technology-based startups, and he has degrees in aerospace engineering, systems engineering, and an MBA. Doug is coming to us from here in Pittsburgh. Next is Jacob Guggenheim, Vice President of Engineering at VistaPath Biosystems, located in Boston. He's a graduate of MIT, where his focus was on single-cell manipulation and supernumerary robotic limbs. Got it, nailed it, where he is passionate about using technology and automation to improve healthcare where it is needed most. And last but not least is Juan Aparicio, who recently joined Ready Robotics as Vice President of Product and is located in the San Francisco Bay Area. Before Ready Robotics, Juan was the head of advanced manufacturing and automation for Siemens. He is a technical advisor for the advanced robotics in manufacturing, and he holds degrees in telecommunications engineering and executive education in product management. Welcome to you all, and thank you so much for taking the time with us today. So to start, I would like each of you to give an introduction of your company, a general overview of what your company does, your company's solutions, the industry you serve, and help us understand who your customers are. Doug, would you like to lead us off?
Sure. Thanks, Julie. First, thanks to the Pittsburgh Robotics Network and to Bally Design for sponsoring and hosting this event. It's, I think, a great opportunity, not only for the audience, but for those of us who are on the panel to learn and try to figure out how, human-centered design and how design works in robotics. So I'm super happy to be here. Omnicell is a pharmacy automation company. It's headquartered actually out in California, but our largest office is here in Pittsburgh. We make robotics and other automation gear for hospitals and health systems, primarily in the United States, but throughout the world as well. It's about $1 billion company with about 3,000 employees. And our largest sort of tech center and robotics center is here in the Pittsburgh region.
Wonderful. Thank you. Jacob, would you go next, please?
Absolutely. A little bit of a contrast to Doug. I think we're a much smaller company, so I can tell you exactly what we do with reference to a particular product. So I think it's most helpful to tell a story about why VistaPath was founded. And so the story goes, and this is a true story, that there was a young man who was suspected of having prostate cancer, and his medical team chose to get a diagnosis or attempt to get a diagnosis for this. And so they took a biopsy of the prostate, they sent it off to a pathologist to get a diagnosis. Prior to that pathologist making that diagnosis, there's this prep process for the tissue that happens within a histology lab. And while the tissue was in the histology lab, it was actually swapped with another patient's sample. And so the result of this is that patient A, this young man, gets a diagnosis of prostate cancer that is incorrect. And on the basis of this diagnosis, actually gets his prostate removed, while the other person does not get the diagnosis they need. And so this process that failed is actually, it's called grossing. And so it's where you create a gross or macro description of the tissue, and that happens within the histology lab. It's done very similar today to how it was done 50 years ago. It's very manual labor intensive. It's very repetitive. So what VistaPath has done is we've built a human augmentation device that sits in the grossing station and allows the person who's performing this work to perform it safer and faster, and to, for example, avoid these kind of chain of custody errors of tissue where tissue ends up being assigned to the wrong person.
Wonderful, thank you. And Juan.
Super nice story, Jacob. Difficult to beat. And I would like to also echo Doug's words and thank PRN for putting this panel together. And I think I'm very excited to have this discussion now into Ready Robotics. So we are also a startup, small startup, around 50 people, headquartered in Columbus. And we are in a journey to democratize robotics. Even though we have the robotics word in our name, I think we are really a people company. Right? We are a people company that want to empower workers to use robots. Robots have been too difficult to use, and it has been a fragmented industry for too long, particularly industrial robots, right? The robots that you find in manufacturing and intralogistics, and more in the service areas. But for a long time, they have been very difficult to program and to maintain. So we democratize robotics by really simplifying the access and the programming of robots without losing power. So your own workers can now program. The robot is not something strenuous to them. You don't need to hire a system integrator to do everything for you. You can use our software for doing that. And also we have built an abstraction layer, an operating system that really abstracts all the lower layers of automation and robotics. So you can choose the best robot for your task and not be intimidated by, okay, this is a big robot. I don't know how to program it. I still have to program it with a calculator from the 80s. That's the user interface that most of these brands use. We try to really make robots less intimidating and that everybody in the shop floor can program them. Very excited to be with all of you and ready to start.
Wonderful. So now we know who everyone is. I want to ask the question, why are we here today and what will this discussion focus on? We hear words design, human-centered design, HCI, human-computer interaction, UX, user experience, usability. So many words, all with different meanings, but all pointing to one thing, market adoption. This is the bottom line. Who will use your product and why? We have many discussions on technology and the development of technology. We hire very smart people to develop technology, and we invest a tremendous amount of money in developing technology, but without a view of who the user is, their problem, which you are trying to solve, and a product that is accessible or usable to those users, the result can be less than stellar. And some of us have experienced that in the past. So we're here to discuss how design can impact that human-computer interaction, the adoption of that technology, and increase your probability of success, increasing your impact on the world, and ultimately creating greater revenue for your company. So let's get started. The first question for everyone, how does your company currently incorporate human-computer interface design into the development of products, and what has been the impact of that work? Who'd like to start?
I can start, Julie, if that's helpful. Yeah, so I think at Omnicell and other places that I've worked, it's sort of a unwritten thread throughout the development process. And so it sort of depends on where you are. If you start a development effort at the very beginning, if it's not something you've inherited or if it's not something you've purchased, for us, there's sort of a creative or more artistic element to design that starts at the very beginning. And this part of the process sort of envisions the environment that you're in. It envisions the problems that you're actually solving for a customer or a client. It in many ways actually draws the human next to the thing that you might actually design as a robot or automation technology. So I think for us, it sort of starts out that way. And then especially in medical device development, I don't know if Jacob or Juan has this in their process yet, as they're much younger companies, but we go through steps that we call validation. And the validation steps are formative at the beginning. So we sort of test things out. There are prototypes or foam mock-ups or some kind of simulated device that continue to mature over the course of development. And then you finally get to the end and we have what we call summative validation, which is in regulations even and sort of requires that you demonstrate that the solution can meet the needs safely and effectively. So that's a requirement for med device design. So for us, it's not really a specific discipline. It's sort of almost like weaved in throughout the entire process. And I think if you don't do it that way, it's sometimes easy to correct a mistake where it's a small technical problem. You have some issue in the electronics or you have a bug in software. Those things can be very potentially very easy and fast to fix. But if you have something where the user actually can't use the device, if you've conceived of it wrong and you have to go back to the beginning to that early artistic and creative process, it can be very expensive and costly. So I think our sort of best practice has been it's sort of a consistent presence through the process.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah, and I think Doug touched on it. It's a very expensive process to redo if you mess it up, and perhaps for a startup my size, it's actually like an existential threat You know, if we mess it up, we stop existing. And so I think very similarly, we take it very seriously, and we incorporate it at the very beginning. And so, you know, one of the first things we're doing is writing user stories and trying to understand exactly as Doug said, like, where does the user sit? How do they interact with this device? And not only that, but, you know, kind of thinking them as a system together. And, you know, there's this space of problem we're trying to solve, and what is the human going to do, and what is the machine going to do? And that's this, as I said, we're a human augmentation device, and you really need to think of both of them together as a partnership attempting to solve the problem, rather than, oh, this is a machine that solves the problem, and then the human kind of walks in off the street, and we don't really know how that interaction happens.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and echoing also Jacob's words, for a long time, automation has been robotics, something that was abstracted, so only some very selected group of people could program, right? You needed a PhD in robotics or a high degree, and then you were able to touch the robot. Otherwise, we are going to design a kind of dumbed down HMI, human-machine interface, so you don't have to deal with all the complexity. The result of that is that a lot of people were left out, right? Same happened with computers at the beginning. We are in the same journey, and if you look at it as how computers were in the 80s, right? Only a few people knew how to program, and then you realize, okay, people like computers can enter the home. We need to also work on human-machine interfaces. In Ready, design is at the core of everything we do, right? We are, the entire product is built around an interface that makes like a visual flowchart-based interface that enable all users to, with some training, to program 80-kilo robots, 100-kilo robots. From that to a cobot, everything looks and feels the same. And usability is at the core, right? It has to feel intuitive. We have to go back to first principles all the time and really understand how do we achieve simplification, right? Through thoughtful reduction, subtracting the obvious, but adding the meaningful all the time, right? And the difficulty here is that also robots are used for a reason, right? They are powerful machinery, and you don't want to remove that power, right? Simplicity shouldn't be the antithesis of power. And so that paradigm is what drives us in every decision that we make. How do we make this simple without losing power, right? And it's a lot of listening to our customers, a lot of, as Doug said, validation at the very beginning. Don't spending time going to a rabbit hole of designing a feature that you don't know if the customer really needs. Understanding their problems. There is a lot in this industry, in particular, a lot of, I want a faster horse, because that's what you know. A lot of people haven't automated before, so you don't know what a robot can do. So it's understanding their problems, going back to what you really need, and then deliver something that, if possible, exceeds their expectations.
Fantastic. We often call that simplification elegance in design. You can take something very, very simple and make it very complicated, and that's not good either. So, but looking for that elegance in design is really, really important. Doug, I'm going to go back to you. How are robotics companies uniquely challenged in including human-computer interactions in their development cycle? When is it ideal to make these considerations? You've already touched on this a little bit, but what is different than other industries or other types of products?
Well, robotics are, they are complex. They tend to be very complex devices, first and foremost. And I'm sure my fellow panelists would agree. And to be honest, as we've seen robots sort of evolve from, you know, earlier in the past century to today, they're becoming less only like industrial tools and more like consumer. And so you get into a situation where you're trying to not design for a very specific skill set and experience, but you're trying to design for everybody, no matter what their backgrounds are. And I think this is why, you know, Juan's particular like company and application is fascinating, because I think it just sort of makes robotics for everyone is basically what he's saying. So to me, it's a very complex, it's typically a very software controlled electromechanical system of some kind. I think there's been an explosion in sensing. I mean, I think we're sensing everything anymore. I think that sensing has contributed to an explosion of data. So now you've got all of this data sensing flying around. It's almost beyond the scope of a human in certain applications to be able to digest it all. And so you get into this situation where you're having someone sit in front of a piece of technology or work with a piece of technology collaboratively. And what do I share with the user? What do I have to, what personas do I have to design for? You know, in our case, we have nurses who use our systems. We have pharmacy techs. We have pharmacists. We have our own people, our own service people. We generate a huge, I was going to use ginormous, that's the very technical term, amount of telemetry back. All of those personas, all of that data, all of that sensing creates a very rich environment, but it also creates sort of like a scary and intimidating one. And so getting back to your question, I think that the human design part of it, and I do like the elegance word, like it's a very positive word about simplicity. And it kind of makes it seem, it has to be much more intuitive. You have to be able to approach a device and not be like, whoa, I don't want to go anywhere near that thing. You have to make it more like maybe products that other people have seen before. So, you know, everyone knows how an iPhone or an Android phone works. I mean, you wouldn't believe how many people say, well, Doug, just make it look like a phone. Where's the app for that? And so all of the other products that are out there that sort of dominate the industry and the mind share for how they work end up influencing how, you know, Omnicell, even as a large company, but how Jacob and Juan as smaller companies are going to have to design, because that's just what people are comfortable with. So to me, it's becoming more consumeristic. There's more sensing, there's more data. It creates a very complex and rich environment. And I think that's the challenge that we sort of all face is, hey, if you're going to be robotics in the 2020s or 2040s or 2050s, you're going to have these an unbelievable amount of information to digest and to use to collaborate with the operator of the technology.
I think that's where we can see experience design has become so much more critical. It's not just the curve and the aesthetics, but it's the usability. And there are specific people with specific majors that come into that can really help out with a lot of that. Thank you, Doug. Jacob, let's look at it from a smaller company perspective. Robotics have notoriously been in capital-intensive product development. What is unique in how to include HCI design for smaller companies or startups? Can you give us some insights from your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the first part of your question there was, I think, spot on. It's notoriously capital-intensive. And as I think I alluded to earlier, it's one of those things where if you make a mistake early on, it could be fairly catastrophic for your company. And so yeah, I think it speaks to the importance of including it early and often. The other thing, and you know, I'm very open to other frameworks here, but the way I like to approach this problem is think about it from a risk assessment. And so we have a series of assumptions about how somebody is going to interact with our device. And we have the resources to test, you know, some set of those assumptions, which is not the complete set. And so what we can do is essentially order those as like most important assumption we're making, second most, third most, and then we build that minimum viable product that allows us to test those assumptions or the set of assumptions that we've decided are important for us to test. And we obviously want to get that minimum viable product out as quickly as possible to real users so that we can get that feedback as quickly as possible and then iterate from there. And so I think from a small company's perspective, it's important to understand that you can't test every assumption. You can't really de-risk everything. And so you need to prioritize what you're de-risking and then de-risk it as quickly as possible, right? Get it into real users' hands.
Let me ask you a follow-up question on that. Do you look at your risks from a technical and a marketing or a user interaction perspective? Do you separate them? Do you think of both of them? Can you comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I come from a more technical background, so I think about it from a technical perspective. You know, I'll give you an example. So one of VistaPath's kind of assumptions that we made very early on, and this requires a little context. So when we put this augmentation device in the grossing station, we have two components. We have this user interface, which is a touchscreen that the person interacts with. And then we have what we call the Sentinel, which is where it's our smart workspace where the actual grossing is done. And we made assumptions very early on about where the person was going to be spending the vast majority of their time interacting with it. Is it the Sentinel or is it the touchscreen? And you know, that very much informs like where we want to, as Doug was saying, we want to provide input to the user on kind of what's happening. Do we want to put all these you know, flashy like lights and LEDs on the Sentinel itself to inform, hey, put your eyes over here this is where you should be looking when you're doing the grossing? Or do we want to say, actually, the web application on this touchscreen is where you should be spending the vast majority of your time? And so we built an MVP very quickly and put it in front of people and said, where are you looking? Like, where are you spending the vast majority of your time? And are you looking in the right spot? And so that's kind of like a technical question in my head, and it informed a lot of design going forward, is once we understood that people spent the vast majority of their time looking at the web application. That was like, great, now we know where we need to put all the user feedback.
Julie, can I comment on that real quick?
Absolutely.
Just real quick. So I think that's an important insight too, because it's somewhat counterintuitive. I can recall 2 or 3 cases where we would provide information to the user and they would almost call it like, they called it pop-up fatigue. This is going back like 15 years. So like we were still talking about like Windows pop-ups and stuff, but it was almost like we were flashing this stuff up thinking that was actually helpful. And what became very obvious, and even when it was helpful, where it became dangerous is people would just start dismissing it because they just tired of seeing pop-ups. They weren't even reading it. Mm-hmm. So you got into a situation where it's like you're crying wolf, crying wolf, crying wolf. There's never any wolf. And then there really is a wolf and we're throwing you in information, but they were just clicking. No, I know. And then a bad event happens. And you're like, well, we told you. And they were like, well, what do you mean? There was like 54,000 messages coming through. So I think that's really an important part of design, is not overload. And because it induces behaviors that are actually counterproductive.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think one of the really important things to think about is the different modalities with which you can communicate this information, right? And so we have pop-ups, which are purely visual. We can make audio signals. We can like haptically buzz our user to potentially, there's all sorts of different modalities. And so kind of prioritizing a modality and saying, hey, when something's really going wrong, we're going to, have a siren go off and it's going to be incredibly loud and right. Everybody's going to notice it and you're never, ever going to miss it. And like, reserving that for only the true catastrophic events when you can say, hey, this needs to be noticed right now.
Just a recommendation to you guys, if you really want to get people's attention, what you do is you put smoke generators on each side of the device and it just sort of fogs up the room. It's really effective.
Electroshocks.
Let's shift gears a little bit for you, Juan. You're talking at Ready Robotics about making a solution that's available to many, many different users. How does HCI change whenever you're in that situation? What is your experience? How is HCI different, or how is it the same? And what are the design considerations?
Mm-hmm. Excellent question, Julie. So I think Doug was also spot on when he said that even no matter if you are in B2B, now users, if you have a smartphone in your pocket all the time, you expect the same kind of level of technology when you go to your job in a factory. And that was the big disconnect. You had this powerful thing in your pocket. You entered your supposedly great, that have been sold to you like a great work in manufacturing. This is where the magic happens, like a lot of machinery. And it's actually very interesting work to do, but the interfaces and the machines there, like they look from technology like 30 years ago or even more. You are still looking into a teach pendant when you want to move a robot that literally looks like a calculator from the 80s, right? And it's like this giant thing with tons of numbers that hasn't evolved in the same paradigms that the smartphones that you are used to. So first of all, it's still bringing that domain, bringing those apps, bringing those ways of interacting with a device that you are used to into the industrial world. It is also, as you said, because our products, they are used for people that have, for example, we have some folks that we are teaching together with ICAMI, the Eastern Kentucky Manufacturing Institute. These are previously coal miners. They haven't touched a robot in their life. And in 2 weeks, they are able to program a lights out manufacturing, right? So that transition, you definitely don't need a PhD in robotics, but also because we are building a platform, we are offering the tools for people that want to build apps. And those people want to code, they want access to more powerful features. So how do you design a product that serves these many different groups of people, right? This is this is a big challenge that is also talking with a lot of folks. It's like Excel, right? In Excel, you can also do sums, something very easy, or you can do macros, right? And start programming. So offering these two levels, again, simplicity shouldn't be against being more powerful, but ultimately you want something that is usable, right? That the end user really can use. Also, the interesting thing about our business model is that we sell through distributors and integrators. We don't necessarily go directly to the end customer. And we didn't start that way. We started going directly to the customer. Now that we are growing, we say, okay, we need to go through these people. And then you lose a little bit on the experience, right? It used to be like this big event where a robot arrives in manufacturing. Everybody was gathering around, hey, the ready robot is here. Let's start automating. It was that event. Now we lost control of that. And that experience is also important to still get, right? So we invest a lot of time also on the unpacking experience. It should, like this unpacking of your iPhone is the same experience. You unpack it, you get a touch screen that looks modern, and then you should be just plug and play as much as you can. And we teach and work a lot with our integrators and distributors, so they also pass that experience through our customers. So that experience remains. It's a different perspective on going B2C, where you control how the entire experience. But we spend a lot of time also on our messaging, on the way that we are positioning ourselves, so that the end user also feels the same way, right? And that the time to wow, this time to, okay, I'm now programming a robot, since I open a box to I'm programming a robot, is as short as possible, right? That there are as little hiccups as possible. And then obviously, as you grow, you are getting more into more advanced features.
I have so many different questions to ask, so many different directions I can go now. I'm actually going to skip around a little bit. So one of them you were talking about was the 80s calculator. And what we get from questions from our people, we get the same thing that, you know, Doug has just mentioned, and you've mentioned, make my product look like an Apple iPhone, make it look like an iPhone. And it's, the answer is sure. It's just, you need to have time and money to do that. It can't be an afterthought. It needs to be part of the fabric of everyone. So question for whomever wants to jump in on this one first. What are the risks when businesses do not consider human-computer interaction in the robotic design practice? And when is the right time to introduce into product design? We've talked a little bit about this already, but what have you seen? What are your, maybe there's a little bit of lessons learned that we might bring in here, but what if you don't consider this? What happens?
I think you immediately feel that the product was designed by engineers for engineers. That feeling is instantaneous. You get it and you said, okay, I'm lost. This has been this framework, this UI has been an afterthought, and it was really designed without considering a single customer. It's something fascinating that you can tell immediately, right?
Yeah.
And so it has to come at the very beginning, not as an afterthought. The same thing with cybersecurity and other things that a lot of people try to think at the end. And if you don't design at the very beginning, you end up making the wrong decisions.
I would even also wonder if it's engineers for engineers or engineers for themselves.
For themselves, yeah.
Because even when they hand it to another engineer can't always understand it either. Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a very short answer to your question. What happens when you don't do it right? You end up doing it again, which is not always so pleasant. But I also want to make sure that everyone, I think, who's been in product development realizes that it's not a sort of purely sequential serial thing, and you never get it all right the first time. Like I don't think I've ever seen something where, well, you launch something and then you're like, well, I'm going to go do something completely different now. Their launch ends up in complex technologies to be more of a process than an event. And so you end up going through this refinement. You end up going through dialing in. You better have hit the target. Like if you don't hit the target, it's a problem. But if you don't hit the bullseye in the human-centered design or how the user interacts with it, there's room to tweak. So you want to avoid these bigger missteps. And I think that's what should be embedded in a process, or it should be part of the philosophy, maybe more so in the smaller company than any particular process. But to me, like, look, you got to recognize that there's a risk and make sure that you're kind of in the neighborhood. And then you got to be willing to say, after you put it out there, whatever we anticipated, no matter how many simulated environments we tried, no matter how many techs or nurses I bring in to operate Omnicell gear, the first customer you take it out to, they want something completely different. And you're like, oh my God, are you for real? We missed that one. So you end up going through this. And I think that's important to plan for and anticipate, because it's not a failure. It just means that it's impossible to know until you actually put the player on the field. It's almost like you can only take batting practice for so long. Until I see a live pitch, I don't know how we're going to perform. And there's just no substitute for the real thing.
One of our core principles in the company is iterate, 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 right? Is you're not going to get it perfect the first time. I like this analogy of you don't have to be in the bullseye, but near enough so what you build can be evolved. I'm also a big fan of this kind of concept of the kind of, I think it's called path of desires or elephant path, you know, when you see this wonderful park where you have the roads paved, and then suddenly like a road that people have done in the grass, right? Because this is the real paths that people are taking, even though you have paved paths. I think the analogy in the robotics domain, I really like it, but we have to be careful that not let all the users try everything, right? Because safety is very important. Going back to the first question that you asked, Doug, what makes this unique as an industry is that there are mines in that path, right, that you can explore, right? It's not like you can let the user do everything, because there are safety risks there. So you have to kind of guide them so they can explore. You are seeing them explore, but on the other side, try to remove all these dangers that you have there, right? Always, when I explain this concept to my team, I like to, there's apparently an island in the middle of nowhere that is full of mines, and now it's full of penguins. There are no people there. So it's kind of that. Now that I have penguins exploding in your mind to remember this, but it's kind of, I like to mix these two concepts of, hey, I'm gonna let you explore, create the path, and then I build the product after I see how you are really programming a robot, but I'm gonna try to avoid all these mistakes that you can make, all these safety situations that, yeah, I don't let you explore in that, from that angle.
Yeah, we don't want any exploding penguins. That sounds like a good.
Yeah, now you cannot, you will not remove that image from your mind.
Nope, nope, that's stuck. Jacob, do you want to comment on risks when you don't consider HCI?
Yeah, sure. I'll answer a slightly different question, which is kind of in terms of iterating and iterating within design. And you know, one of the things that I think was important for VistaPath is, and maybe this is where human-computer interaction is kind of unique often, is there's both a hardware and a software component to it. And often I find that the hardware is very slow to iterate over. If you make a mistake, that's a very expensive process. Software is a very quick thing you can iterate over. You can deploy a new version fairly quickly. And so, you know, one of the things we attempted to do is allow the hardware to be very generalizable. So even if we're like on the very edge of the target, it's rectifiable. We can actually get back toward the center. Whereas software, you can kind of take some bigger swings and be like, hey, you know, that target's a little bigger. If we're on the edge, it's really not a problem. And so that's a I don't know, a framework, I suppose, with which I like to approach these problems.
Great. You'd be surprised, Jacob, how many hardware problems I've fixed with software.
Yes.
Like covering for the hardware fault for exactly that reason is can't go back, don't want to iterate on that. Or if I iterate on it and I do what I want to do, I break something else, or I feel like we're in a box, and you end up covering with it because software is free and fast. And you end up covering hardware ills with software technology.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. Doug, I'm coming back to you again once more. You recently posted about the collaborative relationship of robots and humans. Can you elaborate a little bit about that and help us understand how that links into human-centered design? I found this very interesting, what you posted the other day.
Yeah, I just think that there's, I think most people think of robotics and they think of like these fully autonomous systems or these droid-like things running around, or, we're in Star Wars or something, and all these things are happening like on their own. And I think what I think my colleagues have both said already is like the human is a big part of the system. And, basically Juan's trying to make it so humans can interact better and easily with this. And I think Jacob said that he expects the human to be part of his solution. Most robotics today and automation technology is collaborative. And collaborative meaning the human and the technology, whether it's a robot or there's moving parts or not, is another issue. But it's all working together. And if you do, if you look out at various industries, or if you do a lit search, what you'll find is that people who are successful with robotics and deploying technology aren't waiting for that fully autonomous magic, the technology just does it all on their own. And I think this is what Jacob brought up. It's not quite that easy, and we're not really there. Where we are is where it's more of an assist. It's more of helping people do their jobs better, more efficiently, more productively. It's actually taking a piece of technology and sort of propelling the operator or the team that uses it forward. Even things like surgery and med devices. Robots aren't really doing surgery. What robots are doing is assisting surgeons in doing surgery. And so I think that has implications for folks that maybe see technology as a threat. I don't see it that way. I have a much more positive kind of view on that. And I think it really underscores what the topic of this actual panel is. If you think of technology not as, boy, all I have to do is hit that button and my problem's solved, and I go take a long lunch. If you say, no, it's something I'm going to be working with, I think you end up saying, okay, this is really important. And then I think as you start to think about, like I said before, how complex the sensors and everything, you start thinking about the immersive aspect of what we can do now. It's not just about touchscreens. I think Jacob was saying, he's right. Using all of your senses, almost like a virtual reality kind of way of interacting with technology, I think will happen before we even get to a fully autonomous, I can go take a nap and I don't need to show up at work anymore. And so to me, that's the insight that I was trying to share. And I think what's so important about all of our work when we talk about building technology as it sort of matures over years and decades to a more fully autonomous thing, there's a long list of applications that we shouldn't wait for the full autonomous answer for. We should build a collaborative technology now.
Yeah, I think that's the nail on the head for me. There's we're going to go raise $50 million and spend 10 years on this problem, and maybe we fully automate it, or there's we're going to spend 2 years and we're going to split the design space or split the problem space between the human and the robot. And we're going to say the robot does this stuff very well, the human does this stuff very well. Great, together they solve this problem. We can have this out in 2 years, and that's going to be usable.
Yeah, and you probably get 80% of the goodness, Jacob, out of that very 2 years. It's like an 80-20 thing. You're going to use the robot and the technology for what it does well.
Yeah. If I could applaud or something here, it's like, I'm really glad that this meeting is recorded, because I'm going to have this clip of you, Doug, and repeat it all the time, because this is like, again, 100% agree. Being a little bit controversial, if you see, like, for example, our autonomous cars, right? We have been talking for a very long time. Like when I started working at Siemens was around that topic of autonomy in cars and connectivity between cars. And if you see today, they haven't really touched the life or changed the life of anybody in the world. We talk a lot about them all the time, but the fact that we don't have autonomous cars yet, and we are still waiting for that full autonomy, is not good, right? While there are other things along the way, like other levels of autonomy that really make a difference, that didn't make an impact, having more automated driving assistance systems. There is a startup in Berkeley that I really like. There is Kiwi Robots that these are these robots that deliver food to you. Right? You see them in the streets. They're small cars. They are driven by people in Colombia. They are not autonomous, right? But the autonomy part was so difficult. It's so difficult, right? Navigating in urban environments, that you just remove that problem, de-risk the technology, and say, okay, whenever we are ready, this will be autonomous. But I'm not going to wait 10 years. I'm going to have other technologies like telecommunications and teleoperation that is already mature and outsource that part of the problem. That's brilliant, right? And going back to what we do at Reddit, it's at the core of our solution, right? Is if you go to manufacturing, every single place that I have seen, if you are the owner of your destiny, if a worker feels I am the owner of my destiny, you outperform any AI that you can imagine, right? Because the person now can add their ingenuity and see robots as a tool, right? To that point, as this collaborative tool that enhances my abilities, also with what Jacob said, right? You want to have this tandem of human and robots solving a problem, because robots at the end of the day, they are just tools, right? They are complex electromechanical, mechatronic tools, but they are tools, right? And when you see them that way, and you just build tools to use them in an easier way that is more accessible to everybody, then everybody wins, right? It's not this Terminator from that you see in the movies, right? I think science fiction hasn't helped in this regard. On the other side, one of the few positive things that COVID has had is that, right? That people have realized that when we needed robots the most, they were not magical silver bullet things that solve all the problems. Humans had to be on the line and had to be there and had to maintain the things. And now we have supply chain issues and all sorts of issues besides what people think about AI and robotics. So there is still a long road to walk ahead of us. And it's important to remove the hype from the real technology here.
Yeah, and if I can just, I think, Juan, you made a great point, and I think correct me if I'm wrong, talking about Kiwi Robotics, and how they have this, it's driven by operators in Colombia. One of the phenomenal things that does is it gives you data on how these things really should operate in the real world. And then you can use that information to automate it in the future, right? And so now I understand there's not this 10-year gap between when I decide, hey, I'm going to build something to automate this, and we're not going to really put it into the real world until 10 years from now. No, this is in the real world now, and I'm getting fundamentally great information on how these things should operate. And so that's just another huge value of augmentation. Not only do you get to the market quicker, but you understand how, if you were to automate this process, you should be automating it.
Yeah, it'll accelerate that build, measure, learn loop.
Absolutely.
So let's continue this conversation on the collaborative nature of robotics and think about the design principle that we call approachability. And let's turn a little bit practical. I always love the conversation, but I also like to give people a practical example. Can you give an application or a practical example where one of your products, maybe the product you're working on now or one that you've recently worked on, how you've made it more approachable, and maybe you, meaning your team, has made it more approachable, and how is design factored into that? Can you give an example so that people can start to really grab onto what we're talking about today? Who'd like to start?
I can give you an example, Julia, if you want me to throw one out there to start. So, I think, and I even think you're familiar with this particular example. So, I don't know how long ago, 10 years ago, a little longer, we had designed a medical device that incorporated a cart. It was actually something that you kind of pushed around a hospital or health system. And the unique part about this cart was it had to be shielded it was transporting radioactivity. And so you had this I forget how heavy, but it was hundreds of pounds. It might have been
800 pounds?
Okay, something very heavy. Like I said, very heavy. So it's a very heavy piece of automation technology. It actually was a clinical administration system. So you push this around, and the early design, what we did, and again, this was sort of a mistake, and we went back and had to redo it. We didn't have any kind of like self-propel on it. We had very high grade casters, great wheels. We had brakes on it. Okay, so like if you got it up to full speed, it was going to go through a wall unless you let go, and then it would brake to a stop. So it could be almost like a battering ram if you weren't careful. But what we found was, in addition to the propulsion, we basically had these huge handles that were perfectly vertical, and it made it look like a very industrial kind of device. And they were really thick, and because you could torque it and you had to turn it, and you sort of needed that kind of beefiness to the design. Well, in the next design, we made the handles look more like a baby stroller. They were pronated. They were very light. They had like grips for your fingers. They had triggers. They had a nice sculpted design. And when you're not familiar with a big cart, and this is sort of an innovative thing, and you're like, oh my God, that thing looks huge. That thing's scary to me. And then you say, well, wait a minute, let me show you this other one. And they look, and it's a little bit neater and tighter, and it's got these real pleasant handles like you're going to take your kid for a walk. You get a completely different reaction.
Yeah.
And so the approachability started the instant the gaze of the user comes on. It looks like a friendlier thing. It looks like a more welcoming, something I know I can operate. It even has a positive vibe to it because you're like, oh my God, this is like a baby stroller kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, who can't deal with a baby stroller, right? So I think it's one of those things that was maybe not what we anticipated. We probably underestimated how important that was. I'm sure we underestimated how important that was. And I think it ended up paying off for us in spades in terms of the amount of people that would find, hey, let me come up and ask what that is, or I think confidence that they could actually use it.
Wonderful. Other examples from Jacob or Juan on approachability, practical examples of how you've made your product more approachable to your users.
Yeah, actually, could I ask Doug a question?
Sure.
Kind of on what he was referring to, you know, and so this is one of those things Doug was saying, I'd love to learn from you guys, and this is a good opportunity for me to do that. You know, one of the things I've been thinking about from VistaPath's perspective is we have expert users, right? We don't really care if they use it well the first time. We don't really care if they use it well the 20th time. You know, there's a training that's kind of required. What we care about ultimately is the expert user, right? We have this person who's going to use it hundreds of times a day, and we want them to be as efficient and safe as possible. Is it possible that like the more efficient or whatever metric you're judging by design was this beefy industrial looking thing, and we really don't care if somebody is happy with it when they first approach it, as long as once they're forced to use it, they're going to use it really, really, really effectively? Or what did you find the baby stroller approach did actually create a situation where people were going to be more effective both in the short term and the long term?
Good question. You know, I think it gets a little back to what Julie at the very beginning said, like this like market adoption kind of thing. And we wanted to sort of demystify what we were doing with the technology. And it just, if I showed you two pictures, and I'd be happy to do this off, I mean, you'd be like, oh my God, yes, that other one's much, much better. I can't even, it's not even coming to mind what like a great analogy would be. But I think that the whole concept of the power user to me, especially when you're in a technology that's still early on its adoption curve, you know, it's not really in that early majority or late majority, it's in that visionary kind of thing. You better knock that adoption stuff down pretty well. You know, I don't know what your competition does, or, you know, what the alternatives are for what you're doing, but we could have stuck with that design and said, well, the power users will get over that. And, you know, we'll just make sure that make sure that the techs lift weights in the mornings and they can move this thing around. Yeah, I wouldn't, it's not like it wasn't sort of standard of care. It wasn't something where the category of product was so well accepted that we could even fight through that. In my mind, we were at a phase where we needed to make them much more comfortable with how they felt about using it, and, you know, the impression that they got. So it's almost like, you know, Microsoft way back when they were doing Microsoft Office, and they were trying to figure out like, how do I do all these fancy Excel and Word things when I just want people to be able to type a letter, or I want my grandmother to be able to use it just like I want to use, you know, some power author or somebody who's doing mail merges and all sorts of things back in the day that were important. And they ended up having to create a UI that actually was very dumbed down, and you could actually now you can customize the, you know, the toolbar across the top, and you can really make it seem much less intimidating than if I threw every feature up there to them, or if I overwhelmed them with that. So my advice, having no knowledge of your product or your space, is don't underestimate the power of that approachability in terms of adoption, especially if it's sort of like early on in its product cycle.
Awesome. Thanks.
Juan, approachability. Can you give us an example of how you've made your product more approachable? And it could be the UI.
Yes, and
I want to hear about this because I use robotic arms all the time. Maybe I'm doing it the hard way. Maybe I need some Ready Robotics software.
Oh, of course, 100%, right? And not only I think that was also mentioned on how capital intensive robotics are. It's because everybody's reinventing the wheel, right? Because we don't have a framework to build upon like we have in web, right? Companies like WhatsApp, where 2 guys in a garage, are only possible because a lot of people added those libraries. So that's part of what we are trying to do, to really, focus on the real value added components, that is the application, that is the usability, again, that you can add to your products. Going back to approachability, I think one example that I can add in general of the industry, right, is there are a lot of companies that are using the wrong robot for the task. And there has been a lot of in the industry recently, particularly since companies like Rethink Robotics or Universal Robots. These are robots that are called cobots, collaborative robots. They are collaborative in the sense that if they hit you, then they have some sensors that they can stop, right? Now, the robot may be collaborative, but the application is not. In the moment that you put a flame on a robot, that thing is not collaborative anymore. You put a knife, sorry, it's not collaborative. So there are a lot of applications that you need to do a risk assessment and define the right framework for it. So these robots are not cheap by any means, and they are giving you the wrong sense of confidence, of security, of safety. But when you take a look at how they are programmed, they seem very approachable, right? They seem you feel safe. So that's what we are trying to bring into the industrial robots. They're saying, okay, you like that usability from cobots, perfect, but you're using the wrong robot for your task. Let's use the right robot with the right approach, with the right way of programming, and then you get the best of 2 worlds, right? You also save money because you're choosing the right robot, and on the other side, you also can program it the same way that you are programming a cobot. So that's an example of how we are trying to make the entire industry more approachable, and that you are not intimidated by these big robot arms that look scary, but they are not.
Great, thank you. Last question for all of you. One last one for all of you is, let's do another one that's more practical. We can think about that aha moment that people have. You know, whenever people first approach design, usually takes them a while to get through that aha moment, and then they never look back again, and they realize the importance and the impact that it has. At the same time, when we've taken those at-bats, like you were talking about, Doug, we sometimes strike out. Can you share an example or a story about lessons learned? What have you learned about doing design, and how, now that you know how to do design well, what advice would you give people that are just starting out on this journey?
I think it's really the word journey. Also applies to the customer, right? And understanding the user journey and map that very well. It's not only being very practical. For example, being a software that you need to install and then license and then use. These are steps that don't have to be overlooked, right? So we put initially a lot of work on, okay, once you are programming, this is intuitive. You can very quickly move a robot, and then you are wow. But the experience of licensing a product and installing it wasn't great. Wasn't great because most of our customers they're in factories in the middle of the country where connectivity is not that great. So the process it's not like your computer that you validate something and install it immediately. You have to go back and forth with a USB. It was very tedious, right? So before you even can experience the product, you were already turned down by, okay, how difficult it is to install. So then by mapping that user journey and said, okay, no, we have to make this easier. We really have to think about these other parts that you only do once, but if that's the first experience that someone has with your product, you have to invest on that, right? So that's an example of mapping the entire user journey and try to reduce the time to wow as much as you can.
Wonderful. Jacob or Doug, who wants to go next?
I can give an example. Maybe it's a slightly different tact. So I think the one of the lessons learned I have from looking back, and I think it applies to my panelists who are sort of more in the entrepreneurial phase, but also applies like a big company where you have sort of a visionary or a leader for a certain product. And that is, you know, what I've seen happen is sort of overconfidence, and that you think you know how users will view it. And sort of like the enemy is your ego. And so I think there's been, and I'm sure it's littered throughout every organization that, you know, someone may say, I know what the exact next widget is. This is the way it should work. I know exactly how it should look, appear, and how people will use it. And there's this massive temptation to sort of skip the steps of sort of validation or testing that hypothesis. And you can see why. I mean, the vision, that visionary or that evangelist, it's contagious. There's an energy that flows from that particular individual. Perhaps they rally sort of support. It's going to slow us down. It's going to cost too much. It's what are they going to tell me that I don't already know? And you end up now. Look, you can every once in a while, you know, if you're sort of this. If you're either lucky or good or both, probably have to be both, you can end up with something very compelling and you might get there really, really fast. But I think the risks you take and the sort of one of the lessons that I've learned is, you know, if you don't have sort of validation for things, if you don't have multiple insights, if you don't challenge yourself, a product leader like Juan or a VP, an engineering leader like Jacob, if we don't sort of, even though we all, you know, think we know what we're doing and what we should be doing, and we all have opinions about it, if that isn't checked, I think you're doing yourself, your team, your company, sort of a disservice. And I really think it's important. It can come through outside design. I mean, we've used, Julie, obviously your company before to a great extent and been very pleased with that, and it's worked. And it helps provide this sort of like, have you guys thought of this? Well, maybe not. And I'd like to suggest that anyone who's listening who thinks they have this or is really motivated or inspired by a particular idea, all of that energy is positive and needs to be there, but don't let it substitute for going back and doing the design the right way and validating what you're doing. Because I think that's one of the couple times where I've had some regrets where I've been like, I'm way too out front on this. I'm way overconfident. And I ended up having to do some things over again.
Thank you. Jacob, lessons learned.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add, honestly, beyond what Juan and Doug have said. I think just kind of one of the things that we've tried to do at VistaPath is be very explicit about the uncertainty in your position. And so it's very, I think Doug has said it, it's very infectious to be like 100% this is the way we're going, right? 100% this is how the users can use it. And instead say like, you know, we're very fortunate at VistaPath. We have Tim Spong, one of our founders. He's an expert user, right? He was a histotech. He ran one of these labs. That story I told came from his lab. And yet, even still, we don't always trust exactly what he says. And I hope Tim hears that. But we go out and we get other histotechs to kind of validate what he has told us and ensure that he is pointing us in the right direction. And I think he's been very, very good about stating the uncertainty in his position and saying, you know, here's how I would use it. You know, I worked at, you know, whatever, 5, 7 different labs. I ran a few, but there are hundreds of labs out there. How do the other 100 use it as well?
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you all. I think right now we're going to start taking some questions from our audience. So Jen, could you help us out?
Sure thing. Yeah. So what a fantastic discussion. I think the audiences or the attendees for today want to interject on a few points and just sort of get a little more, dig a little deeper into a couple areas. I think all of these questions that have been submitted, each of you or some of you touched on them, but I think they're asking for some specifics. So why don't we kick it off with, we'll take the next 20 minutes to do this Q&A and then we'll wrap up. So first question, how big are each of your respective design teams, right? I think that's a good question from a functional teams perspective, right? Like how do you organize them? How are they structured? And then, you know, do they do the UX research? You know, or how is the UX research done? So I don't know who wants to go first, because I think there's probably no one way to go about this.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. It's a bit of a complicated answer because we don't have a design team, right? We're definitely small enough that there's not an individual who is fully responsible for that design. So we have one senior front-end engineer who brings some of that experience. We've worked at Bally as well, actually. So we contract out some of this. And then, I think more fundamentally, kind of everybody is responsible. We're too small a company for us to kind of throw it over the wall and say, hey, that's somebody else's issue. We all are considering this kind of in every action we take.
Yeah, don't go ahead, Juan. Sorry. No, please go ahead.
I was gonna just echo the kind of startup view of it's the responsibility of everybody in the company to bring design principles to everything we do. It's driven from customer success that understand and talks with the customers and owns these design principles that we all wanna adhere to. So we have those standards. Standards are good because that keep us also focused and centered, and we can measure how well we do. Also in product, being the voice of the customer and embedding that, and all the minor decisions that engineers do, because at the end of the day, they have a huge impact in our product. We also use external agencies. I think it's also very good. The one that we use called CellSoc. And it helps us also multiply the impact of what we do. And whenever we need this professional touch of people that have been doing this for a long time, we also can tap into that experience and bring it quickly into our products.
I'll just add that, Jacob shouldn't feel bad. He said like he doesn't have, folks because he's too small and it's kind of everyone's job. I kind of like that answer. I sort of think it is sort of everyone's job. And because Omnicell is obviously a far different organization than my other panelists, one of the challenges we have as well as design is we try to make it so that all of our products have sort of like similar look, feel, methods of operation, terminology, they're all, they're trying to all be integrated together so they can work more as a system or as a solution for medication management, not just point solutions. So we have another aspect of design, which is we're not really designing just for one particular widget or product or service. We're trying to actually design for all of Omnicell. And so that does sort of complicate things. It does make it more complex. Sometimes we would like to optimize for one specific area where we're not really, maybe it doesn't make, from a customer's perspective, they would prefer we don't do that, even if we think it actually is a better, if we think this car would have a better feature if we did it with 3 wheels. No, all of our cars have 4 wheels. Let's just keep with the 4-wheel concept kind of thing. So it's that approachability, it's that comfort, it's that the system actually works together, which is another order above design just for the immediate user. It's for a health system and the customer as a whole. Our customers are actually, the number of customers Omnicell has actually is getting smaller. They're just getting bigger because they each gobble up all these hospitals. So now they're one of our key constituents is saying, I don't want to work with all this stuff. I want to work with one thing. So we want Omnicell to be all your equipment and gear. And so our nurses and staff and techs and pharmacists all need to be able to use all this stuff sort of interchangeably. And that's something where we do have a UX team. It tends to be a little more on the software side, and on the hardware device and robotics side, we have a few folks internally, but we end up doing a pretty good bit of outsourcing that to folks in Pittsburgh and elsewhere.
One side comment to that also, if I can, Jennifer. Yeah, and I think, it's related, right? But one thing that is starting to be a bigger thing that we want to tackle is because we create a platform with the same look and feel. We put a lot of effort that all communications are also aligned, all images that we use, the emails that we send, everything aligned and with proper design. Now, being a platform, we want third parties also to design in our and create apps and create. So that's something that it's a little bit scary, right? Because you're losing a little bit of control on how someone will experience your platform. And so we do handrails so they can only design what we said, like to that point, you can only design cars with 4 wheels. We are not going to allow you that. Or let them run wild, and because they are at the end of the day using the platform, right? So what a better testimony of that. So it's going to be an interesting question in the future. How do we handle that as the platform grows? And maybe we need specific people looking into those guidelines. But you can imagine how that multiplies the responsibility for a small startup, right? If you have to review every single app that is submitted into your platform, only companies like Google or Apple can really do that effectively, right? And they even have problems from time to time.
Yeah, a follow-up question I think that's related to that would be, so how do you incorporate then your marketing teams and so the marketing function into the product design, right? Because one part of it is, the product design stages, and then when you're ready to go, to the customer side, how do you incorporate marketing into that? Who wants to take that one?
I mean, I can start. I think it's essential that they are aligned, right? Because when you see these alignments, then your product is presented in the wrong way. Very practical example, we used to say, okay, everybody can program a robot. Like even you can program a robot, right? Like kind of dumbing that down. And it was not a great message. It's like saying, no, I mean, everybody that can learn to program a robot, that's a very, like a different, your workers can do it. But let's not dumb this down. You're still controlling a potentially unsafe piece of equipment. You need to be careful. You need to think of what you are doing. It's not just that you can remove everything and it becomes a thing that a 5-year-old can use. So that messaging, making sure that everything is aligned, that you have this strong also culture and understanding of where you are going and what is your messaging, I think is very important, right? So that's how we bring them along all the way and are more aligned than probably initially when we were delivering those messages.
Great. Another question that we have here is, this is a big one, but I think it's a broad one that sort of helps pull this all together, right? In your experience, in your opinions, what do you think are some keys to success in getting end users to really embrace robotic solutions? So this is, again, a bigger challenge overall, but I think it's still top of mind for everyone in industry right now, right? Have you found, what are some key success strategies or some things that you think help users embrace these robotic solutions?
Yeah, I'll talk about VistaPath in particular. I feel like a lot of what we're attempting to do is instill confidence. And so what I mean by that is, we're introducing this device into a regulated area, and they want it to perform the same way every single time, so that there's not this risk of swapping a patient sample or making a mistake or losing a piece of tissue. And so a lot of what we're attempting to do is simply say, like, hey, this thing is going to perform the exact same way every single time, and that way that that when you use it, there's not this risk of something happening unexpected, right? Because you're introducing this I'm going to use the word partner in the task, right? And if you were to introduce Joe Schmo whoever, and Joe Schmo whoever perform the task unpredictably, that would be incredibly difficult to handle as a teammate. And it's the same thing if a robot performs a task unpredictably, right? We want somebody to perform it the way you would expect. And so we try to design kind of such that the human can predict the actions of the robot.
If I could add to that, one of the things that we've talked about in this panel, getting ready for this panel, was some of the challenges that we find working with many different companies. And the one thing that I would say is make sure you're solving the right problem. Make sure that your product is actually doing something that somebody cares about, and not just nice to have, but a hair on fire problem. And then truly understand that problem. And that goes back to what Juan was talking about with the journey mapping, is really understand what they're trying to achieve, not just what you think the problem is and what they should be doing, but making sure that you understand what their problem is and live a day in their life in their shoes.
The other, maybe another useful model to think about when answering that question is getting a little bit back to this like technology adoption curve kind of thing. And there's a very, very famous book in the 90s. It was written by a guy named Jeffrey Moore called Crossing the Chasm. Mm-hmm. And I think some of my panelists might be a little too young to have read this yet, but you should go out and pull this out. Juan's going to call me a liar because he's going to grab it right now. Okay. All right. Good man. Good man. And so you realize that if you don't want to read the book here, I'll give it to you in like 20 seconds. What people who buy early on, the visionaries and these very early adopters, they buy for different reasons than the early majority and the big meaty part of that bell curve. Mm-hmm. That's the real thing. And what I think what the question might be going to in terms of like, how do you really facilitate adoption? How do you make robotics ready for everyone? You have to, they talk about the whole product solution. The early majority, these people that are really the meat of the market, they don't want the same experience. They don't want the same struggle with the same data. They don't want to have this sort of lack of scalability. They don't want to have this lack of confidence that Jacob said. And so to me, it looks really good. You just sold your 30th robot or something like that, or you got your 30th client and it seems like it's accelerating. You're getting more every quarter. And then all of a sudden, one quarter you hit the wall and you're flatlining. And that's because you're in this chasm and you haven't solved the problem of the early majority. And I think if you read that book or Google it, I'm sure there's tons of synopses on it. I think that's one of it's a classical book now in terms of barrier, but I think its principles still hold true.
Mm-hmm.
One of the nice things of right now is that we are living in the nice wave where robotics are becoming more and more necessary, right? For good or for bad, we have labor crisis right now that we need more people to automate. Automation is not seen as, okay, have been hundreds of factories. I haven't seen a single factory has fired a worker because they don't find because a robot arrived to the factory. It's quite the opposite, right? You always have work. Obviously, some works will be different if you have a robot, but you still want to keep the human power that you have in your workforce. So that plays in our advantage as companies selling robots, but we also have to be careful and do it right? But that experience doesn't burn bridges in the future, that people really use robots for the right applications and automation for the right application. I think one of the things that we try to do is to not think about over-automating. I think we discussed that before. Don't think about the most complex problem that you have in your factory. Start small. Start with a small success, low-hanging fruits. In most factories, it's not even low-hanging fruits. There are fruits in the floor that you can kick. So start with those, and then when you are more confident, then go, because that's a journey, right?
So this next question, I'm going to give it to Julie, because I think the panelists here, we talked a lot about design for B2B, right? For business to business. And we didn't really touch on the B2C, although Juan, you brought it up earlier, right? As consumers, we all have these amazing, very well-designed, user-friendly devices, and B2C is very different than B2B in design. But is it though? So I would ask you, Julie, do you see a design approach that is very different when comparing a B2B design product versus B2C? Just some quick thoughts on that, maybe.
Yeah. So B2B, business to business, or B2C, business to consumer. In some ways, it's a lot the same. It depends what the product is. If it's something more complicated, like a baby stroller, taking Doug's example earlier, you still need to have understanding how people are going to use it, what their journey is, what their needs are. But you add an aesthetic layer that is a little bit different, because people buy for B2C reasons than B2B reasons. So B2B reasons, they're trying to do a job. A lot of times with B2C, the consumer products, it has to have that wow factor. It's the person using it that's actually buying it, where all of our products, there's usually somebody buying it and somebody else using it. So it becomes the user or the stakeholder map is much more complicated in B2B. And you have to understand that consumer impulse purchasing, decision-making that's going on. So it adds a little bit different, but in the end, a lot of the same tenets are used, a lot of the same approaches are used, and you have to understand that.
That's great.
It's a lot of also finding champions. As Julie said, right? The person that makes the buying decision may be different than the person using it, which is very different in the consumer world. And you need those champions that are using your product that probably love it, but to speak up, so that becomes more obvious, right? Yeah, it's like I talk with people buying decisions. Oh, robots never break. Nobody touches them. We have uptime all the time. And then you talk with the workers. It's like, what does it mean? Like, I'm working extra shifts because this thing is not working. I have to do it myself. That there is obviously a lag in communication that you need to bridge, because otherwise, I mean, it's not going to work.
Okay, well, I think that wraps up the audience Q&A, interactive Q&A. I'm going to turn things back over to Joel Reed, our Executive Director, for some final remarks and anything else he wants to add.
Jen, thank you very much. What a fantastic panel. Appreciate it, everybody. I knew I was going to learn a ton, and it was really good that I stayed out of this conversation and just listened. I took a ton of notes. I typically like to share my takeaways. Many times it's just a few bullet points, but we got a lot out of this today, I think, and it looks like the panelists learned from each other as well. I'll just summarize real quickly. I think the biggest one here is to design with humans in the loop. You can solve the problems faster and make sure you put approachability from the very beginning. It's so true now. Robots are becoming more user-centered. It's just not about automation locked in cages or along a manufacturing line. So consider these human factors, partnership between solutions and users. You have to know your users and be thoughtful in how you design for them. Communication, it's a core tenet of human relationships, knowing the right information and who to share it with and when. Looking at user expectations and installing confidence in those that are using your solutions. The warning from the panel is, if not, the risk is that the users will become lost. And worst case, but from Doug's perspective, more likely, you're going to have to rework the product and go back to the beginning. However, there was a caveat: don't rely too much on users. You have to address safety, regulatory, and operational requirements. It's a process, not an event. Start iterating, start small, start immediately, don't wait, and to map that journey out and constantly come back and revisit. I love the comment, take big swings with the software. This is definitely important in this capital-intensive business that we're in. And Doug helped offer the note that you can fix these problems, fix certain hardware problems with software. We talked about expert users, and in my experience, founders or at least early executive teams can be their best for their companies if they are an expert user. And if you don't have that expertise, look to get it, in terms of your advisory teams, or your board, or in your partners, in utilizing, third-party sources. And one of our enemies is our ego. Isn't that true? And a lot of what we do in our lives, and this helps, and this is true in developing a product. So don't skip the steps of validation and testing. And it was good to be reminded that design is the responsibility of everyone. So it's not just a different team that we throw these items over the wall. And then there was something about exploding penguins, but I'm gonna let that one go. And I think that one might be a title of your book in the future. So we've got it recorded here. Thank you, Julie, and to Bally Design for making this event possible. I want to thank our panelists, Doug, Juan, Jacob. Appreciate your time. And I'd like to also thank my colleagues, Jen Apicella and Brad Jocks, for producing this event and all of our other great programs. This has been recorded. We will send a link to the recording by an email as a follow-up, so you can look through it again. I'd like to remind you about upcoming events that the Pittsburgh Robotics Network is hosting. These are listed on our website, or you can continue to follow us on social. But on March 8th, we will be resuming our robotics talent spotlight, where we look at the people behind the industry. And on March 8th, we will be featuring Aurora. And then on March 22nd, another robotics talent spotlight featuring Pittsburgh Robotics member Near Earth Autonomy. Really appreciate everybody joining us today. Encourage you to reach out and get involved with us. We're all working towards the same goal of growing this industry. And if you have any questions, follow us on our website, robopgh.org, or you can email us. So again, to the panel, thank you very much for your time. What an excellent conversations, and we wish everybody a productive day. Thank you very much.